Okay, we are live.
All right, let's call the meeting to order, and would you do the roll call, please?
Yes. Whitus,
Here.
Fenton,
Here.
Buckley,
Here.
Pinkley,
Here.
Yancey,
Here.
Romine, Denham, Milton, Dobbins. Committee member Yancey, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Let's get started with the approval of the Finance Committee minutes for June 25th and joint meeting July 9th, regular meeting, and July 19th, regular meeting. Are all of those, we're voting on all of
Minutes.
those, is that right? All right, I would look for a motion.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we have those approved. And then presentation of regular reports. So Jamie?
Great, so we'll get started. We're going to look at the sales tax report first. Remember, these are August receipts, but they will be June activity. So just keep that in mind as we go through them. Year-to-date on the sales tax, we're sitting at about $8,038,000, which is a 37.9% increase over 2020. It is also a 12%, a little bit more than a 12% increase over 2019. So we're still trending high, and the thing I wanted to say is just keep in mind that we still have about a $7 million gap from the fall of 2020 or COVID of 2020, however you want to present that. And so not only do we have to keep on trend and maintain a higher trend this year, but we also have to find the difference to fill in and to offset that gap with. So I just want to keep that in mind as we look at the taxes and that they are June activity. We have not yet gotten July's numbers. Okay, so we'll move on to the transportation. Remember, the transportation and the public safety tax, they mirror. And when I say mirror, they're half cents, so you would expect to be able to do that quick calculation. And so the transportation tax is 3.9 million versus 2.8 last year and 3.5 the year before. So you're sitting at a 38.4% increase and a 12%, a little bit more than a 12% increase as compared to 2019. And then if there's no questions there, we will move on to the public safety sales tax history. Again, it's very similar. You got 3.9 million year to date. Remember, these are June activity, 38% increase over 2020 and a little more than 12% increase over 2019. Okay, I know I went through those fast. So if y'all have any questions, please feel free to stop me. So if no more questions, we will move on to the tourism tax. Tourism tax is sitting at about 8.1 million. Over last year, it was 3.2. And the prior year, it was about 5.8 million. So we're at a 150% increase, but let me explain a little bit of that. Okay, so the 150% increase is obviously because last year at COVID, we stopped, pretty much the city shut down, which means a large portion of amusement, tourism tax, those things. We still have that gap, and I will keep saying that until we have gotten to the point to where we are chipping away at that gap, and I will keep letting y'all know that because I think that's very important when you're making financial decisions. But over 2019, we are still at 38 and change percent over 2019. So that's good, but I want to explain a little bit of that too. So when you're looking at that, if you would just see those tourism tax numbers, one might think, oh, well, that's all activity and we're just doing great. No questions that the city's doing better than we did in 2019 as of the end of June. But we also have more tourism tax venues this year than we did in 2019. So you've got to consider that as well, meaning we have about 4 more major tourism venues outside of the TIF. And if you remember, the Landing has also switched quite a bit of their retail, which is sales tax, to some amusement venues, which is going to look like the tourism is higher and the sales is lower, but you have to consider those as well. Does that make sense? Okay, I just wanted to keep that in front of you so that when you're looking at that, you take that into consideration. I know these percentages are high, and by no means do I want to be a negative Nelly. I just want to show you what's really factual, okay? All right. Okay, we'll move on to the categories. This just shows you the breakdown of the tourism categories, amusements, theaters, hotels, motels, campgrounds, nightly rentals, and restaurants, okay? This breaks down that 150% for you in what categories that we're getting those numbers from. It also do the year-to-date comparison, but that's why I went into what I did before you saw this, so that you would take all of those things into consideration. Yes, we are doing better, there's no question about that, but you have to consider some of those other things as well when you're looking at the tourism tax, okay? Is there any questions right now? A lot of information very quickly, so I'll give you a moment. Yes.
Thank you, Jamie. I was just going to say that, kind of along the same lines of additional venues for tourism, nightly rentals, there's an awful lot more product in that market as well. And so that number of year-to-date of 201.9%.
That's right.
Is not all just what we had in 2019 or
That's exactly right.
a lot of new product out there.
That's exactly the way we want you to think, because that's exactly right. There's quite a bit more in that area as well. So when you're looking at the breakdown, thank you for that, because that was good. Is there any more questions on the categories or the comparisons? Okay. We will move on to the rolling 12 then. Okay, so the rolling 12 is as if our year ended the end of May, how would we have performed, okay, in the previous year? You have to consider all the 12 months, and so by looking at this category and all the categories across the top, we would have ended about 117% better than we did last year at this time. Okay, remember all of the things that we've just talked about, you got to consider all of those as well on the rolling 12. So this is based upon the monthly tax receipts. And then the next one is based upon actual, you can go ahead and scroll up. The next one is based upon the actual activity. And so what I will tell you is when we populate this report, it comes from the prior year report's information. Does that make sense? So it comes from the prior report that we just showed you's information, and it's formula-based. So basically what we're saying is if we get 1% sales tax, that's what we get, and we see all the categories, and we see all the businesses, and we see everything that filed and those kind of things. What I want to share with you is that the previous report we populate based upon what the state gives us and how we put them back into those categories, okay? This report shows you actual activity in our city based upon the receipts. So what we do is we divide by 0.01% and based on the categories, and this is basically a reasonableness of how each one of those categories have done and have performed based off the information we have. So again, the annual growth rate in the economy, if our 2020 year ended in May, so you would consider June 20th through May 21, all 12 months, we would have been at a 10.9% increase in our economic growth. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, sir, please.
Sorry. I don't know if I've ever seen this before. Maybe I just missed it, but so we only really receive, of these numbers that we're looking at, we really literally only receive 99% of that.
Because of the 1% from the state, yes, they withhold that.
So what ends up in our till is 1% less than what we're looking at.
This is after the 1%,
Is it?
I believe. Isn't it, Sunday?
It says-
This is what we actually receive. The state withholds their 1%.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, so when they do all their stuff, they keep what they believe is rightfully theirs, and then they send it to us. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And some might question if it's rightfully theirs or not, but I won't. Okay, so the next one, this one is a city sales tax report. This one is unrestricted, so outside of the TIF. So we like to show this report to you so that you can see how well the outside districts outside of the TIF are doing, because the TIF has restrictions based upon how we use that money for debt service. One of our TIFs, 100% goes to debt service. The other TIFs is 50%. So we have created these reports so that you can see the sales tax, the 1%, and the tourism tax and how we're doing outside of those. And so what we see right now is the 2021%, the sales tax, the unrestricted portion is at 1.7 million, which is good. I mean, I know there have been times in the past where that was a negative number, so I will tell you that it is good, but just please keep in mind what we're still up against. That's all I want to keep that in front of you. The next one is the unrestricted report, and this is based off the tourism taxes. So it is based upon the same concept outside of the TIF, and so you can see that we're at a 1.2 million increase, 2021 is. For the month and for the year, it's 4 million, a little more than 4 million. Is there any questions on those? Okay, we'll keep moving. And this is the monthly budget reports. This was created, and I know I go over these every month. So this was created simply because we are a basically tourism-generated city. So more than 80% of our economy is set as tourism. And so you can't just do a budget and do a straight line 12-month and know on a month-to-month basis where you stand as far as budget goes, if that makes sense. So what we did is we take 5 years of information, we do an average of where we should sit on a month-to-month basis, and then we compare our monthly to that to show you where we are sitting in terms of how we budgeted for the year. So this report will show you the actual monthly amount received is the 1.2 million, and you can cross-reference that with prior tax reports that we talked about. The 2021, the actual year-to-date is a little more than 8 million, so we're about 40, almost 41% above where we budgeted. Now, the 2021 budget was a little bit tricky, and so as we try to be conservative for every budget, we were up against some unknowns, as I'm sure all of you are aware in your own businesses. So we did budget very conservatively here. So we are 40% above the monthly budget. Now, we still have July's activity, the rest of the year's activity in front of us, but I think we'll still trend higher than what we budgeted. And this is the same report, but this is based on the tourism tax. And if you look, the year-to-date actual is 154%, and we've already kind of talked about some of those things. So unless you have any questions there, does anybody have any questions on those two budgeted reports? Okay, we'll keep moving then. Okay, this is the monthly reports for July. So we'll go over the general fund first. If I move too fast through these, I know I tend to go, I know I tend to go kind of fast on these. But if you need me to stop, please feel free to interrupt me. I do not mind. Okay, so on the general fund, the revenues are at 12.7 million versus 10.8 in 2020. And if you look at 2019, it was 12.5. And then if you go down through each of the categories, one of the anomalies, Tracy, do you mind scrolling up just really quick on the revenues? That 32,000, that negative right there, that was an accrual that we had to adjust off for, so that's why it's a negative revenue, okay? And then you'll see the expenditures on the general fund, and I would like to add, the general fund makes up a majority of the departments of the city of Branson. And so I think it's really important to focus, while we need to focus on some of those special revenue funds for sure, it's also important to give a strong focus on the general fund. Because the general fund, there is a lot of administrative, but there is a lot of departments in there that without this fund and the ability to take care of these departments, the city would not function. So I think it's important, just as important, to look at the general fund and each department and look how they're trending and what we can do to help those departments as well as all of the other departments in the city. So one thing I just want to pay special attention to, the total expenditures for the general fund is 4.8 million versus 2020 is 4.8 million. Look how close those numbers are. And then 2019 was 5.1. Now those numbers are close because if you recall, last year, we pretty much stopped a lot of the one-time, the capital, of the unneeded expenditures. And this year, when we budgeted for 2020, we tried to do the same thing because of the unknowns that we were facing. So you can see that, but I also want to point out, you can look at the departments, they watch their budgets. And I think that's important to note as well. Okay, so I wanted to focus on that, and if we can move up, we'll go to the transfers.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes, please.
At the top of that, it says expect 58%.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Sure, that is based on a 12-month straight line. So that would mean if we took the budget and we divided it by 12, and every month is a percentage, at the end of July, we would be sitting at 58.8%. So that would be a straight line budget comparison.
And you're talking about
If you'll scroll up,
total
Trace.
expenditures?
Yes.
So in other words, we're ahead of schedule.
Yes, if you looked at it as straight line, but that's why we also do those other budget reports that we just went through, because it's not as applicable. We still do it because we want you to see where we would fall, but it's not as applicable in a tourism-generated city because there's some months where your revenue comes in here and some months where it doesn't. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, okay. Okay, if you'll scroll down to the transfers. These are the transfer ins and transfer outs, and you can see that general fund, a majority is transfer outs. And so that's just in comparison to the budget and in comparison to year over year. We're at 5.7 million of transfer outs as of the end of July for the general fund versus in 2020, we were at 5.6, a little under 5.7, and for 2019, it was 6.6. Keep in mind, in the 2020 and the 2021, we reduced the subsidies for the public safety and the Parks Department by 25% because of the pandemic that we were facing. So you'll see those reductions in those months for the transfer outs, and in 2019, you will not see that, okay? So that's a bit of a comparison on why the expenditures are a little bit higher in 2019. Is there any questions? Your unreserved fund balance is sitting right now at 8.4 million as of the end of July. Is there any questions on the general fund? Okay. In a little bit, after I go through these, we will talk about what we're doing as far as the budget goes for this next year and where we're sitting at right now in our schedule. So that's why I'm highlighting some of these things that I don't typically highlight, so you can have that in the back of your head, okay? If you'll scroll up, Tracy, thank you. Here's the Public Safety Fund. Remember, we do both of the departments together, and then we split them out so that you can see each individual department. But because it is a restricted, it's got its own tax, we have to do one special revenue fund, and then for internal purposes, we split them out so you can see the difference, okay? So this is your public safety sales tax. Your revenues are at 3.4 million versus 2020 was at 2.6 and 2019 was 3.1. And just remember, the tax started, what was it, April 1 of 2018. So you can gauge that. Now we are really, for 2021, we're on track and pretty much mirroring the transportation tax. The expenditures for the public safety fund are at 5.6 million versus 6.4 in 2020 and 6.3 in 2019. Okay, and this is your transfer ins and your transfer outs. You can see that transfer in from the general fund, and as a point to check us, if you ever would like to, you can always look at those transfer ins and outs and make sure once we transfer it into one fund, you find that transfer out from the other fund and make sure those tie. That's another check and balance for you as well, okay? You're sitting at together a $6.8 million fund balance for both departments. Is there any questions on that so far? Okay, we have them split out unless you want me to highlight each department. I'll just keep moving through these because there's not a lot of history because we just split them out this year, okay? But as we get into the projects and the major projects that are up against these funds, I think it's important to note, and it's important that we split them out so that you can see by project where we fall, okay? Here's a look at the convention center as of the end of July. The convention center's total revenues were 1.9 million versus in 2020, 1.1 and 2.9 for 2019. So we're trending less than 2019, more than 2020, okay? And then expenditures were at 2.2 million for 2021 and 1.9 for 2020 and 3 million for 2019. And then you can see the transfer ins and outs. And one thing I wanted to note here is you can physically, you can observe that they are spending well more marketing dollars than they have in the past. That's why that number is quite a bit higher. So they, every budget year, they're given that $500,000 of marketing dollars, and they have that to spend. Well, in the past history, they haven't spent, there's been years where they only spent 90,000 of that 500,000 or 120 of that 500,000. Now they are working to really market and market the convention center, and that's why you'll see that number higher. So they're sitting right now at a fund balance of $465,306. The next one is the tourism tax fund. Your total revenues are 8.4 million, and obviously their taxes are quite a bit up, and 3.3 million for 2020, and 5.9 million for 2019. Your expenditures are 3.7 million as of the end of July for 2021. 2020 was 3.9, and 2019 was 6.7. One thing to note is the debt service on this. So we paid off a debt service in 2019, and we still have one debt service. The last large debt service payment against the tourism is in January of 2022. We will still have that 12 million COP against the tourism for the Highway 76, but that'll be really the last debt service against the tourism, and we can look to paying that off. Okay, so, and then you have the total other financing sources, which is your transfer ins and your transfer outs. Again, this goes to a lot, the Branson Hills, Meadows, Landings, TIF, those are TIF areas. And then we have a transfer in from the 76 CID as they reimburse us for that 9.2 million from the 76 project. So we're sitting at as a fund balance of 18.3 million. Note that there's a portion of that 18.3 million until the debt is paid off that is a debt service reserve restriction, okay? Okay, here's the transportation fund. Again, the total revenues are at 3.6 million, 2.7 for 2020 and 3.2 for 2019. And the expenditures, garage, the streets, the MS4, is 1.5 million versus last year was 1.4, and in 2019 was 1.6, so pretty consistent. And then you have your transfer ins and outs, and there is still TIF and debt service against those as well, which is a majority of your transfer outs. So you can see it's 1.4 million in 2021, 1.2 in 2020, and 1.4 again in 2019 for a fund balance of a little more than $4 million. Kind of wish I could make this more exciting for y'all, but I can't, so sorry.
It's very interesting.
Okay.
We're sitting here very quiet because we're very
Okay,
interested in
okay.
what you're having
We might need to
say.
play some music or something in the background. Okay, so we'll move on to the Parks and Rec Fund. There wasn't much going on in the Capitol, and so I just didn't figure the perpetuals, never anything going on. So the Parks and Rec is one thing I want to show you out of here is their revenues are 1.3 million versus last year, 792,000. And 2019, they're still quite a bit up over 2019 at 1.2 million. Notice the campground. One thing I like to highlight is the campground over last year is close to almost doubling, and they're still quite a bit over 2019. Also, the ball program's quite a bit up. The pool is quite a bit up. So you can go down through there and do your own analysis of it. But they've done a good job as far as keeping their revenues really high and their expenditures lower. Will you look, scroll down, please, Tracy? Thank you. And you've got 1.3 million in expenditures, 1.1 million, a little bit more, honestly, almost 1.2 million in 2020, and 1.4 million in 2019. So less expenditures than 2019. If you completely take out 2020 and you want to do a comparison to 2019, they're still up to revenue, down to expenditures in the 2019. So your total other financing sources, remember that's the subsidy. We did drop it 25% as a result of the pandemic, so they're sitting at $437,500 versus in 2019 it was $519,424, and then last year it was $472,222. So that's where that comes from. Right now their fund balance is at $1.3 million. And we are looking at moving about $300,000 of that. After the audit, you know, we typically say they only have to maintain a 10% reserve. And so after the audit, we typically look at how much we can move of that to their internal service fund. And so we've been looking at that, hopefully to bring a budget amendment to move some of that. We're looking at about $300,000 still to leave them a cushion. You have to leave a little bit more in there because if we look at a 5-year, it'll take them down lower and lower if we don't maintain a higher beginning balance, okay? And the next one, this is a picture of all governmental funds. All the funds we just talked about are all governmental funds, and it's just a combination of all of those and how they look together. The next one, unless there's any questions, we'll just keep moving to the water sewer fund. The water sewer fund is based off of obviously the consumption in our city and our rates. Keep in mind, we raised our rates 2% for water, 7% for sewer for this year, but also our consumption is up, and you can see that on the reports coming. So that's where those revenues come from, and we're at 6.1 million versus 4.7 in 2020, and a little more than 5 million in 2019. And it will keep going for the expenditures. We're at 6.9 million for expenditures, 6.6 for 2020, and 6.8, so pretty consistent across the board for 2019. And then you can see the transfer ins and outs. Obviously, most of theirs is capital. That transportation fund is if we have any water line breaks and we have to tear up the roads to do that, they transfer money back to the transportation fund to offset that expense. So that's what that is for. And then we have an internal service fund that we stopped. But that's, you'll start seeing that moving forward if everything becomes more normal, whatever that means. Okay, fund balance is at 65 million, 65.8. The 65.4, the other thing I need to point out is remember that fund balance is not spendable dollars. So those are assets. A majority of that $65 million are assets, okay? So about the spendable, you have a little about, I want to say about $5 million, maybe a little bit more, but we'll be bringing to you that. You'll see the cash available during the budget, but you can also see cash available on the balance sheet as well. Just remember, a majority of that, in the past, it's caused some confusion because they think, whoa, 65 million, awesome, we don't have to raise rates. That 65 million is all wrapped up in all the assets we have across our city, so. Okay? The rest of these are the capital funds, which not a lot of activity going on right now, hopefully to ramp up in the future. And then you have your internal service funds. We always like for you to see that because we want you to see the money, basically an internal service fund. You can almost look at as we are replacement schedules, those kind of things. We put money in there so that it doesn't have to take away from operations. Annually, we build that money up for the replacement schedule of things that we already have. That's kind of the general idea behind it. And we just started building those back up a couple years ago, and then the pandemic hit. So that's what we're looking to hopefully get to do in the future. Keep that coming. So 3 to 5 years down the road, you'll have enough in there to start really doing your replacement schedules, and we will know how much money that we need to actually put in there on an annual basis to keep those assets and replaced and maintained. Does that make sense? But was it, Stacy, 2017 that we really just started the internal service fund back again, or was it 2018? 2018. Okay. Yeah, so we transferred money in 2018 and 2019, and then 2020 hit, and then we had to stop all those transfers. So we got a little bit, you'll notice with water sewer, they got a little bit more. And parks, we were able to do a little bit more, so they have a little bit higher balance in there. And so as we look to the future, we'll be starting that back up again, hopefully. Is there any questions on the financials right now? Okay, then we'll keep moving. Behind that is the cash by fund report, and then the balance sheet. Again, we do this so that you can see that the money we're reporting to you in the fund balances, and we have the actual cash in the bank. So the money that we're reporting to you, you can see this one should tie back to your balance sheet. And your fund balances, your balance sheet on your fund balance ties back to your income statement. So all of these three reports, they connect. And you can be able to see that, and this should give you some assurance that the money that we're telling you that is in there is actually in the bank, and we show you that reconciliation. Okay? That's what that report is for. The two funds that I always tell you are a little bit of an anomaly is because there's minor funds wrapped up in with them is the public safety fund and the general fund, and you'll notice that their fund balance will be a little bit off, and that's because there are minor funds wrapped up into those, and we have reconciliations to show you that. So if you have any questions or you ever want to see that, please feel free. I also bring those with me in case you have questions about them here. I can answer those, all right? Okay, and the next ones are the balance sheets, and we've kind of already highlighted those, but keep in mind if you ever want to know the cash in, the investments, those kind of things, always refer back to the balance sheet. And that is my financial report. Unless there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Hey, Jamie, could you state the gap number again?
It's a little more than $7 million.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So while we have to maintain this year, we also have to find a way to chip away at that gap that we lost from last year. So if there's no more questions on the financials, we move on to the disbursements. And we will need a vote to approve.
Yes, can I get a motion to approve the disbursements of 15,000 and over?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. All right. I don't want to rush through those. We did take the vote, but if we have any questions, we'd be glad for Jamie to answer those.
Okay, no more questions. Then I guess we can move on to, let me see. We also have that public safety financials, but I just put those in there. I think I skipped that. I apologize. Should not have skipped that, but I did. So number 2, this is the report that we show you, that we will continue to show you, and we will continue to update it. But this is the public safety financials, revenues versus expenditures, and the future outlook. And I believe the debt service is wrapped up in that as of 2023 for the fire station and the police station as well. So that is not a good picture, but it's a picture nonetheless that we need to pay attention to so that we can come up with ways to reverse that picture. So we like to go over that on a monthly basis to make sure that you have all the information that you need in front of you to make the best informed decisions. That will come up again in the budget discussions, and not just this one, but the general fund one as well. So just keep that in mind. And I do apologize for skipping that one.
Jamie, I had a comment on that.
Sure.
If I could. I noticed that it's changed since the last time I saw it, and it looks like in 2021, this year, that the expenditures are outpacing the revenues already. And that includes the subsidy from the general fund, which is what you brought up earlier, that we really need to be focusing on. So my question, I guess, right now is how do we bridge that gap, and can that happen via general fund?
Okay, that is an excellent question. So let's just take some time on that one, because I wanted to bring that up, and I will bring it up again during the budget meetings, those kind of things. But the question for the subsidy, so that includes the subsidy for this year being reduced by the 25%. So when we started building the budget, this goes general fund and public safety. So I'm gonna highlight these really quickly so y'all are informed as to what we're facing, okay? So when I was asked to do an analysis to increase the subsidy by 5%, which would mean you would increase the subsidy from the general fund by 5% for 5 years and increase it into the public safety by 5%. So obviously, yes, that would help out the public safety because you're giving them about $450,000 more dollars on an annualized basis. But the general fund absolutely cannot sustain that. And I'm saying that purely from a numbers perspective, but as we talked about earlier, the general fund makes up quite a few departments in this city. And Stacy and I went through and started doing some analytics on that 5%. And one thing I want to tell you is in 5 years, it would increase that subsidy to about $9.7 million out of the general fund into the public safety fund. And that would sound awesome for the public safety fund. But if you're considering the whole city, as I would hope everyone would do, if you consider the whole city, then what you're doing is really greatly reducing the general fund. And I'm speaking of numbers, specifically numbers, because that's what I can factualize for you. So when we go out right now, as we sit right now, we cannot balance the operations of the general fund. In the past, many of you who have been on this committee for quite some time, you have heard me say, we have a long-term problem in that if you look at this, we're upside down at this year, and we have to find a way to fix that problem now so we don't get there. Well, guess what? We're there. And in the past, I've been here for 13 years, and so in the past, we've been able to say, okay, for this year, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. We can actually get your revenues and your expenditures balanced for this year. But next year, here's the assumptions that it's going to take for the next 5 years to actually balance your operations. I'm speaking in general fund right now, but all the funds really are applicable here. But, and I've also said many years in a row, those assumptions are not realistic. So even though we've come up with these assumptions and ways to balance your operations, you cannot sustain a 0% expenditure increase. Your expenditures grow. I mean, you have to look at inflation and the consumer product index and all of those things. That's just not something that's realistic, but that's what we've had to do in the past. Also, your personnel. It's not sustainable to say that we can't increase payroll by even 1%, and that's what we've had to do for those assumptions in the past just to make the future work. Well, this year, I know I'm telling you a lot, but I think it's really important for you to know this. This year, we have kind of, no, not kind of, that's the wrong choice of words. We have hit a brick wall because we have spent a lot of time looking at it. And I will tell you this, I'm standing up here telling you this because the department heads have nowhere else to trim. We have gone through those budget meetings. Their operations are already, in my opinion, bare. There has to be training. We want our staff to be trained. We want continuing education. Some of our professions require a certain amount of continuing education. Some of these things we cannot trim any more than what we've already trimmed. And we are already at a $1.2 million problem for 2022. What that means is our expenditures are still 1.2 million higher than our revenues. So the only possible outcome, and I'm telling you the problem I do not yet have a solution for, okay? The only possible outcome is to increase your revenues. And how you do that, I think that's a citywide discussion. But as far as numbers and given you data that backs up those numbers as of right now, that's where we stand, okay, as far as revenue. So if we were to increase that subsidy by 5%, that's not included in those $1.2 million number, that upside down number. So I hope that answers your question, because then what that does is it compounds over 5 years. And then instead of a problem in 2022 of 1.2 million, you're at a problem in 2026 of where's your fund balance in the general fund? It's not there. So those are things that I would really caution you when you're looking at the budget dollars and stuff. I am having a very difficult time. I do not want to present an unbalanced budget. That's not me. That is way outside of what I know in my career, and I don't want to do it. Right now, we're not done. We're gonna bring it back to you on September the 17th, and we're gonna have a really good discussion and let y'all look through what we see so that you can see everything that we're doing, transparency-wise. You can see everything. But that's the problem that we're sitting at right now, and so I would just challenge you to really pay attention to the dollars and cents.
Hey, Jamie, have you run this chart at 0.75 instead of 0.5%
Oh, for taxes?
for the tax?
No, I haven't, but we can certainly do that. That would not take a lot.
So there's an awful lot of information here. I know we all look at that. This one usually gets my attention the most because it affects the general fund so significantly. And when I look at this graph, to me, it looks like, and it doesn't include that 5%, correct? That additional
No.
5. And so it looks like we're almost balanced in 2022, but you're telling me we're not. So that gap only widens so between here and 2030, it only compounds itself. So there's no even possible feasibility for sustainability.
Well, so this is just the public safety.
Right.
The one I was just referring to you was the general fund. So keep in mind that the general fund for 2022 is hurting because of operational. So what you will see is that your fund balance is a little bit higher. But you remember, your fund balance is there for one-time expenditures and for like natural disasters, things like floods, tornadoes, stuff that we've all experienced, okay? That's what that is for. We keep 20% by code. We keep an additional 10% for opportunity, those kind of things. But those are for one-time expenditures. So the capital, the one-time expenditures, your internal service fund moves, the transfers, those are not included in your operations. Because if you cannot sustain, you cannot keep dipping into your fund balance for your operations and expect it to still be there in a few years. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
But I guess, yeah. So do we really balance in 2022 or not in this
No.
fund?
Not yet.
I mean, the graph
And we're
says we
not
do.
there yet.
Okay. And
It shows, if you look slightly, you got a slight problem, but yes,
so is this based on actual numbers?
yes.
It is.
As of right now, yes, and so,
So this is real.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, on your 20, and I know we're not talking about the budget for next year
Yeah.
quite yet, but
That's okay.
what assumption are you making in terms of revenues, that it just stays, are you projecting any growth, or that it's going to stay consistent with 2019? Like, what are you basing that revenue projection on, is my
That's a
first
good question. And so for 2022, it's a little bit higher than what we have done in the past. The reason for that is when we started looking at dropping 2020 during the pandemic, we started looking at what are we going to do and how are we going to fix this. We had to take it down in theory and internally so that we could manage that. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because then we had to have a plan. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to get them back up? So when we looked at the 2021 budget, we said, okay, we're going to take this up a little bit because we think it's going to come back, but we're not going to be 100% whole yet until around 2023. At the time we looked at those numbers, that's kind of what we were hearing in the economy, okay? So for 2022, it's greater than even a 1.5% increase. We took it back up to 2019's sales numbers. Because of the economy, the first half of this year has done well. I don't anticipate it to keep up with those trends the last half, just based off everything that we're seeing. But I will tell you that for the 2022 budget, it is not just a 1 to 1.5% increase. We took it back up to 2019 numbers. But for there on out, it was a 1.5% increase year over year. We try to do that to stay conservative. Based on historical numbers, it's about a 2 to 3% increase in this, unless there's a flood or a tornado or an anomaly that hits us. So that's what we did for our assumptions for the projections for the rest of the 5 years. But know that the 2022 numbers are going to be a little bit higher than that because we tried to take it back to our last normal year.
So, and thank you for that. And so I guess my follow-up question to that would be, if our revenue exceeds what we projected for this year, which I think factors into this $7 million deficit, how does that affect this overall picture of being short 1.2 next year?
If we come in better than what we've budgeted, the difference goes down into your fund balance. Your fund balance then increases, and you can do more capital, more one-time, more internal service fund transfers to help prepare you for the future.
So it would help with that 1.2 million budget deficit for next year?
It would not help for the operational balance. It would go into your fund balance, and that fund balance, you typically only use it for one-time events, and because operationally, so when we had the pandemic, we had to say, what's it going to take for us to run the operations as we stand right now for the city and still be successful? And so you have to balance your operations that way, because then in the event of an emergency or a natural occurrence and all these things that we've all sustained, you can drop everything else and know that your operations are still going to be stable, and then you can use that reserve, whatever you have there. That's what sustained us, is the reserve. We got
That
it down.
7 million came out of that reserve.
Well, we dropped that 7 million during the pandemic. We dropped it by the 25%. And so if you want to think of it that way, technically you could probably assume some of that, because we did have to use some of that reserve to sustain us for the 2020, which is where that 7 million gap comes in.
So, and your goal every year then is you want whatever we budget to be based on the projected revenue.
Yes, because then if you come in higher, which we hope, I'm very conservative. I've been made fun of that for years, but I don't bother with that. So if you come in higher than what you have projected, then you have more to do with, and it's not operationally. It is those one-time events. It is keeping up with our IT that's ever-changing, and that's just the world. That's the world as we know it. Keeping up with those large capital things, keeping up with our replacement schedules. All of those things are those one-time occurrences that in the event we just have to simply operate the city, those things we can do without right now.
So, and again, I know we're not
Sure,
technically
no
talking
problem.
about the budget yet, but I think what I'm hearing you say is, revenues kind of are what they are, and expenditures, unless we just start cutting costs somewhere, we're kind of just in this position and have to figure it out.
That's a very good way to put it, yes.
So do we look at, because, I don't know how you proactively try to increase revenue without just raising taxes, right? So are we looking at those expenditures, and, what are we, is that what you're going to be presenting to us next
We
month?
are, yes, we are looking, and I know that Stan and John and us and the department heads, we've all had discussions through the budget meetings and all of these things. We are actively looking, and the reason why I said there's just, the departments, they have cut in the past as much as they can, because there comes a point in time to where if we ask them to cut more, you don't have the services that everybody loves for the services to be for the city of Branson. If you cut the expenditures, you cut the staff, you cut the personnel, all that, you're reducing the services for the city of Branson. So then I would just say, you have to ask yourself, do we want less services? Do we want our streets to not look as good? Our landscaping to not look as good? We want Wi-Fi to not be there. All those things are questions that we talk about, but that are decisions for you all to make.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know you haven't run the numbers, but if you had to guess, if the tax was at 0.75 instead of 0.5, how closer would those two lines be?
Well, let's see. What's a half of what we've got in so far? Give me 1 second. And I'm blind, so I can't see that. Okay. So if you look at, as of the end of July, we've got a roughly about, this is August receipts, so we've got a 4 million, okay? But as the end of July, we'll just call it 3.5, so you divide that again. So you're adding about another 1.25 or something like that onto your taxes. So if you look at what we've got now, it's 4, then you add another 2, you'd be sitting at 6 million. It would take you, instead of the 8 million, to 12 million, stuff like that. And I can do that analysis for you, so I don't really like to guess, but I'm just kind of theorizing those numbers. But I don't think it would absolutely fix your problem, is what I'm telling you. I'm telling you it would go a long ways, but it wouldn't close that gap. I'd say you need closer to 1%.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One last,
No, you're fine. This is good
I
discussion.
thought about this.
I felt like the first part was boring, so.
no. To help me understand it in the bigger picture, if, in a general fashion, if after Labor Day, we use 2019 numbers moving forward, based on the deficit that we have and the buckets that aren't quite full as a result of those deficits, how long, what percentage increase would we need over in 2019 before we were whole again? I know that's wild, but
No, actually, that's easy, because how we assumed the projections for 2021 is we did actual through July, and then in most cases, we kept it flat to 2019 and/or average 2019 and 2020. So the budget numbers that you will see, the budget numbers that we were talking about, the operations and the deficit that I'm telling you we're faced with, would assume what you were just asking me, because all of the projections for 2021, which is how we base our 2022 beginning balance and where we start. So all of the, just to give you a little bit of background, all the department heads went through and told us what their projection for the entire year was going to be. And then when we go through and we do the revenues for the projections, the revenues are assumed at, we already know actual through July, so that's easy. So then August through December, we kept it flat to what was brought in at 2019 and/or 2020 and/or averaged them depending on what that category was and what makes sense. So a lot of that is already assumed in that budget that we told you was going to be 1.2 million upside down right now. Does that make sense?
it does. And so when we first started cutting the budget, and your assumptions were that it would approximately 6 months to recover from X loss.
Per month,
Per
yes.
month. 6 months recovery time per month based on that budget. So what I'm curious about is, if we use the numbers that you just said, how long before we're whole again and we've recovered from that?
That is a very good question.
Jamie,
I
when
know
we,
you don't have a crystal ball.
I don't, and that's a good question that we can answer for you by the time we do the budget meetings.
just to add to the issue, when we originally came up with that figure, while the figure's not different, the 1 for 6, we made an assumption that we wouldn't still be in this on August 26th
Yes.
of this year.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, please do.
So you're talking about the 0.5 versus 0.75, John. What is that? Are you envisioning that tax being increased, or what? What was that discussion?
It's my assessment that when we originally put that tax in place, that we knew at that time that we were going to be in this predicament.
Gotcha. So it was passed at 0.5%, and it wasn't going to be enough.
Instead of 0.75 like Republic just did, or 1% like most cities use.
So that wraps up the general fund and the public safety discussion.
Thank you.
unless you have any more questions.
And you wanted to skip that.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I really appreciate the questions because it helps prepare us for the next meetings. So never be afraid to ask me questions. I'll
So-
just tell you I don't know if I don't know.
So Jamie, so when we look at this information, it becomes even more important for us when we look at increasing fees to offset our costs. We were talking about this in a meeting yesterday, you know, the expense of holding an event when you factor in all the police and all of the stuff, you know, it's a losing, it's a losing proposition. But, and I know the last thing anybody wants to do is raise taxes. I know the last thing anybody wants to do is raise fees or whatever. But it's like, we can't continue to operate the way we've always operated and expect to be able to be generating revenue enough for us to grow and different things. And so I don't know how we talk to people, but I think, you know, you hear an increase and everybody's flag goes up and no, 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 no. But to have some conversations with people to educate, this is the reality if we're not able to, you know, if we're not able to pay for ourselves, our services we provide. You know, so it's several things. It's not just taxes. It's a tax increase, but it's really, we've got to look at what we charge for what we do and make sure that we're being compensated for that.
I totally 100% agree on that because we typically try to keep our fees at 90% of what it actually costs us. So sometimes we do less based on categories, based on decisions that are made, but we have a model that we typically put in staff time, staff hours, those kind of things to generate what those fees will be in an effort to not go over 100% of what it cost us, but still have a cushion there so that we can give some leeway. But we try to, in theory, keep it 90% of what it cost us. So if we, even if we don't do fee increases annually or every 3 years or those kind of things, then essentially we've gotten way behind of that mark because there is expenditure increases on an annualized basis, whether we like it or not. That's what happens. Costs go up. Costs go up for the world, for the state, for the city. Costs go up, so we have to keep up with that, which in turn, cost of living goes up for our people, and we have to keep up with that. So it's just a never-ending cycle. So if we don't do those fee increases and we don't keep up with them on an annual or even every 3-year basis, then we've gotten way behind the mark, and it's just hurt the city's income. Does that make sense?
And the problem with waiting to do it, then you have to take such a big jump. And
That's
then
exactly right.
it makes it where, you know, it causes heartburn for people or whatever, instead of just budgeting those in on a regular basis so that it's incremental and it's over time, instead of like coming in and saying, we're going to do a 6% or whatever increase.
In the past, even in the Finance Committee, we've always presented, and what we've done for some of those fees that we did get behind on, we presented, here's what it's going to take to get us up with what we need to be, but we'll do it over a 3-year basis so that the direct increase is not so much. We've extrapolated that over 3 years instead of 1 year, but then at the end of 3 years, where we need to be in order to run the city. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any more questions?
Good conversation.
Yeah, I
Good
do like
questions.
it. Thank
All
you.
right, see, we started off slow and we're finishing with a bang here, so.
I was worried I was getting boring. Okay. The next one, I believe, are we at the IT contract now? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Chad, let him do a presentation. Quick one. I mean, not quick, Chad. You know what I meant. Sorry. I didn't mean you had to hurry. That's not what I meant. Sorry.
I rarely get to stand down here, so this is so different for me. Thanks for letting me entertain myself. So we're here to talk a little bit about cell tower co-location agreements. And before we get into that, you know, the details behind why we're here in terms of the contract specifically as it relates to finances, I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of. That is definitely not working.
Chad, could you get closer to the mic?
Yeah, sorry. Again, I should know that. So what is a co-location agreement? In this case, it's essentially mounting equipment on top of a structure. So you have a single structure with multiple carriers that want to put equipment on that. In this case, telecommunications equipment, and in this case, a water tower. And we've got several of those throughout the city, and we get approached all the time to either put new infrastructure on those for these carriers or to modify existing agreements for one reason or another. And so in this case, we've got a water tower that's over, we call it the Landmark Water Tower, and it is right here. And so it's kind of at 76 and 165 behind Ruby Tuesday. And we've got multiple carriers on that. In this case, T-Mobile approached us and said, you know, we've got equipment on that tower, but we'd like to add a generator. And that requires ground space. Sorry, I'll get you another picture of this. And before I go further, you can kind of see all the pieces of equipment here that they use. Some of them are even on top, which you can kind of barely see up there. And so they came to us and said, we'd like to put a generator in. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure why they didn't do this years ago when they first installed this equipment. It's not standard procedure, as far as I know, to not put generators in because you want your equipment to run in the event the electric goes out. But for whatever reason, they now are fixing that issue with this site. And so when they approached us, we obviously engaged with utilities to make sure that, you know, hey, generally speaking, before we take this to the board and to committees, are you okay with this? And they've indicated that they are in this case. And so I want to point out a error I made. It says 5 by 11 inches. That'd be a great deal for us if that was the case. It's 5 feet by 11 feet. But so we're looking to increase this by $300 a month to compensate for that space. And we're keeping all the general contract terms. I think this was a 15-year agreement that was just executed a few years ago, 3 or 4 maybe. And there is a 4% annual escalator in this contract that would stay in place with that. So we currently charge them $3,374 a month. That'd go up to just over, I'm sorry, that is currently almost $40,500 annually. And we're just looking to increase that to $3,674 a month, or just about $44,000 annually. And so your next question might be, well, how does that compare to all of our other contracts? And you can kind of see here, these prices, you know, these costs will vary a little bit because some of these contracts were executed prior to, and that annual escalator will impact, you know, how much revenue we have from these. And I will tell you that, you know, employees prior to me negotiated most of these contracts, and we inherit these and try to manage them. But one of the goals that I've had and, you know, recommendations that I put forward is to try to be consistent with what we do with these carriers so that when we're approached again, there's not a whole lot of back and forth. This is generally what we charge. It's public record. You can see what we're charging everyone else, and that, you know, you cut to the chase and there's not a lot of back and forth. Sometimes that goes well, sometimes it doesn't, because you never actually speak with T-Mobile or AT&T. They always hire a third party to negotiate on their behalf, and so it's this back and forth stuff. But that's what we're collecting today. And so our recommendation, I guess, would be to approve this, but I'm also happy to answer any questions, and pending your approval, because this is a revenue contract, you have to bring this to the Finance Committee, and then ultimately it'll go before the board to modify the original contract. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
There's no questions. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
I'll take that second. You can have the motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right,
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the revenue.
Yeah,
I was gonna say.
every penny counts.
Every penny counts.
That's
There's
right.
an increase in our revenue
Those
right
are
there.
several pennies right
Yeah.
there, so.
Every meeting we show up with that.
I think the next one is Kendall, right? The water sewer? Come on down. You're the next contestant.
We've saved all of our tough questions for you, Kendall, so. Probably, since we don't have a quorum. So we'll just take a minute.
So Kendall, is this going to create any revenue?
And, well, depends how you look at it for the future, but it could potentially save us $100 million.
I like it. Conversation.
We do not have a quorum. Would you like to take a brief recess? Because we're still streaming and we, as far as I understand, can't move forward, so
We can take a break? Okay, we can take a break.
I'll post that. Thank you. Okay, the stream is back online. Ready when you all are.
Yeah. Oh, wow, you're back.
We can resume now.
All right, good morning. What I have for you this morning is our Compton Drive flood protection engineering selection process for phases 3 and 4 of the project. Give you a little bit of back history. We've completed phases 1 and 2, one being the conceptual design study, and then phase 2 was the preliminary engineering design, which consisted of a subsoil analysis and also the hydraulic modeling of the lake. And with that consultant, they provided us a recommendation of a flood wall height to be equal to the 100-year flood event with a 3-foot freeboard, which basically that's roughly around a 9-foot tall wall around the treatment facility in order to protect us. Part of the process is securing an engineer. We submitted an RFQ, or we requested an RFQ back in July 16th, and we received 2 proposals on August 12th, and one from Anderson Engineering and the other one from HDR Engineering. So we formed an evaluation team to rank those proposals based off of a criteria, and through that ranking, first let me back up and say that that team consisted of myself, It also had Keith Francis with our Public Works and Engineering Director, and then also our finance purchasing agent, Ryan Hill, was involved in that. So we came together and first of all, we actually reviewed the proposals individually and then ranked those proposals based off of the ranking sheet. And then we came together and compared our rankings and our opinions. So based off of that discussion, HDR's proposal, or after discussing the evaluation scores, the firm being recommended by staff for the engineering and design would be the HDR Engineering. HDR's proposal was detailed and is, in our opinion, the most comprehensive in the discussion of the project approach, and they do possess extensive experience in the type of work to be performed. Charlie Sievert, the lead project manager, he was involved in phases 1 and 2. In phase 1, he was actually with Black & Veatch Engineering, and now he's with HDR. Eric Dove is a lead principal in the project. He's a lead design engineer. He has extensive background in flood protection measures for projects across the United States. We also reached out to, part of the process is we reach out to references from each engineering company. Through that discussions, both engineering companies were highly recommended. HDR, again, they, in their qualifications, they had extensive background in flood protection and even in this particular type of flood protection with the sheet pile walls as well. Anderson Engineering, we received great reviews from them as well. However, their expertise expressed in their proposal was mainly for earthen dams and water and wastewater components. They did not provide us any examples of flood protection measures similar to our project. With that, if the committee, Capital Improvement Committee, recommends proceeding with HDR, staff will work with firms, work with a firm to create a detailed scope of work and for the project design and negotiate a design contract price. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Hopefully had an opportunity to review the proposals, and I'll take your questions.
Kendall, would the selected engineering firm, once those contracts are negotiated, would those contracts come to this committee or go straight to?
So once those contracts or once that negotiation process is complete, we will have to take a budget amendment before you guys, and then we'll take a budget amendment and the contract before the board itself.
Thank you.
And so with this particular company, you do have experience with the people leading the team, and they've been responsive in the past, done what they said they would do, and...
Yes, HDR Engineering completed phase 2 for us. They had extensive knowledge in the project. They brought up very valid points with this project. We have had very detailed conversations on how we're going to proceed with protecting the treatment plant, about the subsoil conditions, stopping of the water leaching underneath the treatment plant, pumping the water out of the treatment plant when the rainfall hits, because once you put the wall up, you're going to create a giant bathtub, basically, that you've got to dispose of the water. They also, again, with them being part of the phase, having done the phase 2 portion of this, they will be able to immediately start up and run with the Phase 3 section, whereas an outside engineer other than HDR, they would have to go through the whole preliminary design document, which is roughly 400 pages, and study that document in order to proceed with their design.
Anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns to share?
Yeah, I just have a small question.
Sure.
Do the fees fall within the grant descriptions that are out there? I mean,
Yes.
I assume this is all grant funded?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no other questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd like to make the motion to accept staff's recommendation to work with HDR on Phase 3 engineering.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Jamie, I think next on there is the project status report.
Yes, and there's not a whole lot of change, and as I said, I keep saying that month to month, we keep that.
There will be
recording.
someday, though.
There will be.
Yes.
We keep it
We'll look forward to
every
this one.
month, and we will point it out when you'll start to see the biggest change so that you can be aware. So you just remember the CID is already doing some stuff. We're getting stuff, hopefully getting back up, started going. It's already been approved to underground the electric line, so for Phase 3, I should say, or Segment 3, whichever you want to call it. So that is the project status report. We will always just keep that in front of you. So I just wanted to point that out, and unless there's any questions with that, we can just move on.
I don't have any questions. Anybody?
There's not a lot of change, yeah. Okay. The next one is just the reports, and the report that I had today was to really talk about, the budget process and how that works, and I will try to be quick on that. So, the next meeting is September the 17th that we have coming up. Excuse me. And I think if it works out for y'all's schedules, I think it's gonna take longer than 2 hours. So I wanted to check and see if you all were open to increasing that meeting a couple hours, maybe 3, maybe 4. We'll try to, but I think it's important for you all, especially this committee, the Finance and Capital, to really dive into that prior to, John says 6 hours. We could compromise. That's a long time to stand up here.
Do we have a time set for that? I don't have that on my calendar, but.
Did we have a time for that yet? I don't think so. What do y'all want?
I'm out of town that week.
You are, okay.
That's Friday the 17th, you said?
Yeah, whenever the 17th is.
Yes, it's on a Friday, September 17th, yes.
What time works best for you all? And Jamie, I'll send you all the documents so you can at least look through it.
It'll give me something to do while I'm out
Yeah,
there.
it's something real interesting.
Buying us lunch, Jamie?
I will buy you lunch. Yes, actually Stan will, so, whatever y'all want.
And here we're trying to cut back on expenditures.
It's already in the budget, so it's accounted
We
for.
just made $4,000.
I'm
So
good.
whatever y'all
I'm
want.
good, mornings or afternoon, or middle day, whatever.
Okay.
Is fine.
Michael, Cody,
10 o'clock always works for me.
okay? So could, like,
AM's best for me. I think I'm supposed to, it's not on my calendar, but I think I'm going camping that afternoon.
how about we do 9 to 1? Do a little compromise? Can y'all do that? And we will provide lunch and drinks and maybe some chocolate or something. So
I can do 9 to 1.
9 to 1, does that work?
And then
It's not quite 6 hours, but I just don't think we're going to get through everything we need to get through.
And I don't want to rush.
No.
I mean, seriously, I
Not
want us
this
to be
year.
able to have plenty of time to ask questions, and so I don't want us to feel like we're having to cut through stuff to get.
Don't change it on account of me, but I have something, if from 8:30 to 9:30, so probably won't be here till 10.
Okay.
Either way,
I
so
I mean,
don't
10
change
to
it on
2
mine.
is okay, but I don't want to cut into your camping if 10 to 2 works.
It's just in the
Then y'all will get breakfast and lunch. Stan,
10 to 2.
he'll take care of
10
it.
to 2,
Okay, 10 to 2?
and you'll send out an invite for that?
Yes, we will do that, and
When will you have the stuff that we can review prior to that? I mean,
we will post it, but we'll also email it out. And so you'll get a lot of documents, and we typically send out the line item as well as the summary, just so y'all can have everything and can go through it. And I think this year it's just gonna be a lengthier discussion so that we can talk through the line items as well as the summaries, so that you all can provide some insight maybe to help. So that's what we'll do. And just know that September 17th, and then I think the study session is September the 23rd. I am going to also talk about the projections, the 2021 projections, and where we stand and all of that during that study session. And then on the 30th of September is that joint budget meeting from, I believe it's noon to 4, September 30th. So if it's not, we'll hit your calendars.
Got that on my calendar.
Yes.
That one's on my.
Okay. Yes, we used to do it, at night, and, yeah. So lunch will be provided, it'll be noon to 4. But that's when we discuss with the board and this committee combined to have that really good discussion about the budget and what direction we need to go. And then the first reading of the budget before the board is the first reading in November, and I can't remember what that date is. I believe it's the 9th, but I'm not 100% sure. And then the second reading, and then that'll be the end of the budget cycle.
So on my calendar, it says Finance Committee meeting on the 23rd of next month. Is that not happening?
No, because we're doing that special one on the 17th. The 23rd, there's a study session anyway. So we will, once we're done with this conversation, we'll fix it on your calendars, so y'all won't have to worry about it. But unless you want to have another one,
No, I would prefer
because that's the
not.
normal one.
I didn't see anything on the
Yeah.
30th either, is the reason. I-
Okay. We typically, it's usually the fourth Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock, so we just hit the calendar, but we'll just need to clean that up for the budget time, and we'll take care of that. But the more people that are able to attend, just the more insight that we can get. So I just think this year, September is going to be a big month. Y'all are going to see me a lot, but it'll be helpful to get your knowledge for the budget's sake. So that's what I wanted to talk about, let you know what's coming up. We've already gone through the budget meetings with the administrators, and so we're at that point right now of compiling it all, doing our magazine that we typically present to you all, and trying to get things cleaned up. But like I said earlier, we've kind of hit that brick wall. It's something that we're going to have to pay closer attention to. And even if I have to bring it to you all on the 17th and say, I still can't balance, that may be a possibility. Or I have to bring it to you all and say, oh, yes, I balanced, but here's the unrealistic assumptions I had to do to get there. So just know that those are some possibilities that are coming. I don't like doing that, but it might be something I'm faced with, so, okay? All right, and then that is my report. John wants to say something?
Pam, could I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Going back to the public safety thing, Jamie, monies achieved through use taxes could also be used in public safety issues, right?
Sure, because you'll have it general fund, public safety, and transportation, because those are sales taxes.
And we're about the only city around us that doesn't have a use tax, right?
I believe so.
Thanks.
We just had this conversation yesterday, John, and so it's something we need to do something about. We're leaving money on the table, so, and we don't need to be leaving money on the table.
And maybe I'll just have that report. The state usually, the state usually presents that halfway through the year, so I'll pull it up and see if they've got a more accurate report out there for us.
Okay.
Sorry.
Any other comments, questions, follow-up? Anyone? All right. Jamie, thank you to you and your staff for this presentation. I know you have to put a lot of hard work into it, so we appreciate it. We appreciate your willingness to be so open and transparent with everything as well, so thank you.
Thank you.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I know nobody.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.